the next part of the Cloud Cafe series. We've all been and had a wonderful summer break. I'm back for the September session. So today's session, we're looking at, is the Green Party the party for the future? And why green politics is different. So what sets us apart from other political organizations? How can we embrace and engage the environmental movement more broadly? And what is going to happen to us and our sort of core green values now that other parties are really, I would say, ramping up their environmental policies, but for me, a lot of it is actually lip service, but we'll see how it goes. And we want to explore the distinct philosophies of the Green Party, where we came from and how that's developed and refined over the decades, and have a look at the principles of what the Green Party stands for in terms of participatory democracy, nonviolence, social justice, sustainability, respect and embracing of diversity, and obviously the core value of ecological wisdom and expertise. So if everybody, while we kick off for the two presentations that we've got, could turn their cameras off and stay on mute. This just means that for those who are watching after the fact via the recording, there's less background noise. But if you'd like to ask any questions while the two speakers are doing their presentations, just use the chat function and we can go to those if they're relevant, or we can go to them after. Yes, there is a question from Richard Priestley already. Richard? Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Just to say, I thought there was a third speaker, Ellie Chowns from North Herefordshire.
Yes, there was, and unfortunately she's got COVID and she's unable to join us tonight. She thought that she was going to be able to soldier through it, but I think it's knocked her for 6 today. So we told her to rest, and hopefully we'll be able to stay, hear from Simon, hear from Pete. We might hear a few things from some of the other people on the call. I've seen Catherine just sneak in there. And there's a wealth of knowledge and conversation that we can have anyway, I'm sure.
Thanks for that.
But thank you, Richard. Okay, so without further ado, we will start with Simon. So I'll just tell you a bit about Simon in case you don't already know him, which I'm sure you probably will if you're in the green world or in the Stroud world. So Simon is a professional ecologist and has been for over 40 years, working on bats to beavers, albatrosses to flamingos and everything in between. He's helped design, create internationally important wetlands, introduce beavers to Gloucestershire, and advised government on issues including human disturbances of wildlife, bats and wind turbines. He was a Green Councillor for Stroud District Council for 21 years, the chair of the Environment Committee, and oversaw council cutting its waste to landfill by 50%. I'm sure he's going to tell us the wonderful history of the Green Party, and off you go, Simon. You can probably have a few more than 10 minutes if you so wish, seeing as we just have the two speakers.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. I'm going to give you a bit of a sort of a very brief history of the Green Party, where it's come from, and some of my thoughts. I've entitled my little presentation, History, Roots, Conflicts and Strengths. The Green Party in England and Wales, in its current guise, is a relatively newcomer to the environment movement, compared to the RSPB, which was formed in 1889, National Trust in 1895, CPRE in 1926, C&D in 1958, just to mention a few. Coventry in 1973 is identified as the birthplace of a political party called People. The founders included lawyers Tony and Leslie Whitaker, an estate agent Mike Benfield and Frida Sanders, and a former fighter pirate Walter Longcroft Neal. Although Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace were formed in 1971, it was allegedly an interview with Paul Ehrlich in a soft porn magazine, Playboy, about the population time bomb and continuous economic growth that was the key influence on the formation of the People Party, or the people. Whilst this makes a great story, and it may have some truth in it, talking to some of the founders of the People Party 40 years on at a Green Party event in 2013, I learned that it was the blueprint for survival, published in the Ecologist magazine in 1972, that was probably a much greater influence on many of the early members. This blueprint was endorsed by numerous eminent scientists and academics and environmentalists at the time, and has actually links to Gloucestershire, because Sir Peter Scott, founder of the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, was one of the signatories for Blueprint for Survival. The blueprint raised the spectre of endless growth, leading to disruption of ecosystems, exhaustion of resources, build-up of pollutants, food shortages, and collapse of society. It was, in many ways, the 1970s version of Jem Bendel's deep adaptation paper, which that so influenced the formation of XR here in Stroud more recently. The Blueprint for Survival also was advocating solutions, and in an attempt to paraphrase a 48-page document, I will say, our task is to create a society which is sustainable and which give the fullest possible satisfaction to all its members. Such a society, by definition, would depend not on expansion, but on stability, thus removing the sword of Damocles which hangs over the heads of future generations. Powerful stuff, 1972. The Whitakers and Benfields were actually former activists in the Conservative Party, and one of them was been a previous Conservative councillor. And along with about 10 other people of the early founders, dubbed the Club of 13, because that's all there was of them, they began to realize that the planet could not survive with endless growth being promoted by both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in the early 70s. And there was a need for a political alternative. Although the People's Party origins were clearly not of the left, and a student Green magazine at the time once described members of the early People Party as conservative anarchists. I'm not quite sure there's such a thing as a conservative anarchist, but it's a good analogy. However, you have to remember there are numerous older strands of the radical political environment movement that have strongly influenced the development of the Green Party we know today. Perhaps the most well-known being the Levellers, and particularly the radical offshoots, the Diggers. They put their ideas into practice and started to cultivate common land. And in Gerald Winstanley's pamphlet in 1649, and for the younger people, a pamphlet is a sort of it's sort of like a podcast in writing. He envisaged the ecological relationship between humans and nature, acknowledging the inherent connections between people and their surroundings. And the Diggers also advocated an early form of public health insurance and community and communal land ownership. But you have to remember, in the early 70s, coming out of the late 60s, there was a whole range of alternative movements, from the Summer of Love in 67, shattering conflicts of 1968, Vietnam to Paris, that influenced the early members of the People Party. Freaks and hippies and even communists were talking about ecology. And there was the rise of non-violent direct action, particularly linked to the anti-nuclear movement, which again has links to Gloucestershire, when they stopped the nuclear train to Berkeley by building a scaffolding tower. And there are still people or old activists in Stroud who were there when they stopped that nuclear train. And the Freaks United Party, which I don't think ever stood any candidates, said in a manifesto that they wanted the elimination of pollution, all anti-environment practices outlawed, transport would be free, petrol engine cars will be outlawed and replaced with railway and tram system, combined with low-cost electric cars available to all, and the abolition of all forms of sexism, racism, and ageism, and breaking down large states into regional areas for governance locally. Quite interesting that that was sort of being spouted in the 70s, quite similar to the Green Party manifesto, and also some of the philosophy of ecocide. But it was the People Party, that set up the national political party and was first to field candidates at national and local elections on an environment platform. Some of the early manifestos and leaflets were a strange mixture of ideas and policies, and many of the early party conferences were very controversial. And Clive Lloyd of if anybody's been to Green Party conference, Universal Income's Fame, he's produced a great book on it. He remembers the contest to ratify the Manifesto for Survival in the 1974 conference, and described it as a bloodbath. There was outright confrontation between those coming into the party from the left and the founders seen by the left as being from the right on the platform, and allegedly some young long-haired yobbos had come down from the north to take over the party. The German Green Party had the fundies and the realos, but in England it was far, far more complex, lots more different factions from different areas. But despite this, the People Party survived, and in June 1975 went on to rename itself the Ecology Party to better reflect its core values, and began to win local council seats, standing as the Ecology Party. The first time in this country somebody standing on an environmental ticket got elected by a democratic process. 10 years later, to fall in line with the other environmental parties in Europe, make the message even clearer, the Ecology Party changed its name to the Green Party at the Dover Party Conference in 1985. And then in 1986, John Marjoram was elected in Stroud as the first Green Party councillor in England. About 25 years ago, I was asked if I could explain where does the Green Party fit within the right-left spectrum in UK politics. My response was, and still is, it doesn't. But when I was pushed, I argued that unlike other political parties which tend to be driven by ideology, the Green Party is a mission-driven party, putting all people, the planet and its complex web of life and future generations first. But when I was pushed at this event to say more, I came up with this analogy. There's an oak forest. Okay, it's not a real forest. This is an analogy, so don't be too picky about it, okay? I'll put it simply. The conservative approach would be to invest in a company, to cut down the forest, store the timber until the price goes up, then sell the wood at a profit, and use some of the returns to invest in more forest. The left-wing Labour approach would be to go and form a state-owned body, to cut down the forest, thus creating jobs for the workers, so they can buy things made out of wood from another state-owned company down the road to grow the economy. The green approach is different. It could be, let's manage the trees, keep them healthy to create jobs, collect the acorns to grow more oak trees, leave enough acorns for wildlife, maybe free roaming pigs. The shade is useful for all of us, and the roots suck up water to protect everyone downstream. It looks great. Everybody can enjoy the birds singing it's spring. Or the green approach could be, we do need the wood locally to build some houses. So let's plan together. Take down only those trees that we need, help set up a workshop to turn the timber into useful products to build houses, ensuring the carbon is locked up. The spaces between the cut down trees will make great wildlife habitat for 10, 20 years, and there'll be a space to grow new trees. We'll then think about harvest them in another 200 years' time. Or it could be, let's just leave the forest, there's lots more forests elsewhere. The point being, there is no one ideological driven solution, but there are green local solutions decided by local people looking to create sustainable jobs, housing, balance the carbon flow, and leaving the land for wildlife. And thinking long term. Whilst probably there's more of the left-wing green outcomes coincide with left-wing outcomes, but many of the outcomes also fit with conservative outcomes. You have to remember that the Green Party, from its very origins, has drawn people from the old-fashioned right, the left, campaigners, feminists, anarchists, New Age travellers, spiritualists, deep greens, LGBTQ, all sorts of different sexuality, green capitalists, free festival movement, green CND, deep greens, techno greens, and far more different routes. The Green Party has actually provided the space, the safe space for radical and often brutal debate, decide party policy in an open, democratic way at party conference. But in recognition of the global ecological crisis and desire to put the planet and people first, most members, not all, most members put aside their historical political ideological baggage and work together to actually make actual change through the political process, no matter how broken the current political system. This ability to debate across a wide spectrum of political ideals and be able to see others' points of view provides an unbelievably helpful training and experience for those who get elected in the Green Party for the politics of the real world. They see beyond the political froth, look for real solutions, and they have the ability to work with business or other politicians who they don't agree with for 50 to 99% of the time. Elected Greens, which makes elected Greens excellent politicians. They have the ability to see through the dross as well as sit through those endless meetings. And all elected Greens I know still have that old digger ethic of getting things done. This has been demonstrated by the Stroud Greens that have successfully run a joint administration with Labour and the Lib Dems for over 10 years, even working with the Conservatives to get the 2015 local plan through. Delivering new social housing, best waste and recycling scheme in England, retrofitting private and social housing, sustainable flood management, strategic land purchase, cycle infrastructure, carbon zero plants, and much, much more. And this is happening all across the country. There are now 16 principal authorities with Greens sharing power. And they all have a real mission to make their local areas better, whilst not destroying the planet for future generations. From high energy performance housing, that's cool in summer, warm in winter, and doesn't break the bank in York and South Oxfordshire. Decluttering the streets in Brighton by providing cycle hangers, policing the shopkeepers, helping parents with pushchairs, and of course, reducing congestion for motorists by helping cyclists with safe, cheap, secure parking. To radical public transport solutions in Sheffield and Herefordshire. Ellie would have probably talked a lot more about this in Herefordshire, where they cancelled a £200 million bypass to fund public transport and active travel. Or it could be to brokering partnerships across 6 district councils led by the Greens of Lewis for carbon zero social housing. This is why the Green Party is so relevant today, in today's fractured world of clickbait, self-interest, and instant disagreement. Greens see beyond this. They see the problems for those beyond their own tribe. Speak truth to power. Call out the ideologues, the self-serving popularists. Unlike the authors of the Blueprint for Survival back in 1972, see the long-term solutions. And from their diverse roots, see the common threads needed to bring politicians together. And like the diggers of old, see the opportunities to get on with it and make real change. Thank you.
Amazing, Simon. That was like rabble rousing at the end. I feel like you could be, you should do that at the front of a protest. We should record you and play it. But thank you so much for taking us on that whirlwind tour through the history of the Green Party as it is today. Thanks for the definition of pamphlet for those of us who, you know, have never seen one since being young. I'm including myself in that, even though I'm probably over the age now. But I think those are the things that you mentioned around, you know, our attachment to these really important movements that happened before the Green Party became the Green Party, in terms of like nuclear disarmament, ecocide, making that picture for us around the oak forest of that we're not on a spectrum. And I think that that's one of the things that brought me to the Green Party, was the fact that we recognize that to make the change that's necessary, we're going to have to bring everybody along with us. And so dividing us with more lines is not going to be useful for anybody. So I think that, yeah, being sort of united by people and planet is a really beautiful part of the Green Party. So thank you very much for that. And also I'd really like to know at some point what Techno Greens are. We'll find out. Okay, so next we have our second speaker, Pete Kennedy, who, if you don't know already, you'll be getting to know a lot more over the coming months and years, I'm sure. As an activist and a campaigner, Pete had been involved in a number of campaigns opposing austerity cuts to public services, fighting plans for fracking, which you might have to start that up again, Pete, current news, and protecting pubs as community assets, which we're all very grateful for. Pete studied economics and politics at the University of Sheffield, where he focused on environmental economics and sustainability. And he went on to study law part-time alongside working, and qualified as a barrister as well. So if anyone has any law questions, Pete's your guy. Pete is our candidate for the next parliamentary election, and we're all very excited about that. So Pete, your 10 or so minutes starts now, and everybody remember, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them into the chat function.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Simon. That was a great speech, really barnstorming at the end. I really enjoyed it, and I think it tees up what I wanted to talk about really well, which is about why green politics is differently, and zooming out a bit to focus on the global greens, what the global green parties are all about, and then also to look at the philosophical basis of the Green Party of England and Wales. And hopefully that'll fit together really well with what Simon said, and then I'll throw in a few of my own thoughts at the end before we open up to questions and debate from everybody else here. So I want to start with my conclusion. So the question is, why is green politics different? Green politics is a unique global political philosophy that occupies a unique political territory that cannot be claimed by any other political movement. And as Simon mentioned, it's not about left and right. This is something completely different. It's a focus on long-term ecological stability, focusing on meeting the needs of all humans all around the world and protecting the rights of future generations. And really, it's nothing short of a fundamental shift in economic, political and social structures. And it goes much, much deeper than simply announcing some good environmental policies and some investment in green stuff on a short-term basis. So I'm just going to pop in the chat a couple of things. You don't have to read them as we go along, but do read them at some point, because these are the documents that I'm referring to here. They're extensive, we can't go through it all, but I just wanted to give you an insight into what these organizations are all about before you can go off and look into these yourselves. What you will see is, like me, when you read these, you just think, oh, yeah, that's why I'm green. You know, it's amazing to just read something that you nod along to so much, especially when, you know, seeing the news and just everything that goes on around in the world. It can feel really alienating, and just to see such a coming together of views and of a party, really, it's amazing to just feel at home. So the Global Greens are the global organisation of over 100 Green parties worldwide, and they have over 400 members of parliament in parliaments right the way around the world. So looking at some of the principles from the Global Greens Charter, they have some key principles that unites all of the Green parties around the world, and those are participatory democracy, sustainability, non-violence, respect for diversity, social justice, and ecological wisdom. So going through those in turn, participatory democracy, we're talking about things like for each adult to have an equal vote in all electoral systems. That's a radical statement here in our country, where we don't have proportional representation, we have a majoritarian system, but it's an even more radical proposition in many countries around the world, where even very basic political rights are denied, and where standing in even opposition to the government party can put people at great individual risk. It's a global principle that all elections should be based on proportional representation. There should be strict limits on political donations and full transparency of political donors. There should be direct participation in decision making, and power should be concentrated into local and regional communities, and that power should only be devolved upwards where essential. So it's really turning the system of power on its head to be focused at moving from the local to the regional to the national, then the supra-regional, and then the global level. Sustainability. The Earth has a limited capacity for material consumption and waste production. There's only so much we can take out and only so much waste that we can put back in. We need to maintain biodiversity through sustainable use of renewable resources and have responsible use of non-renewable resources. We need to redefine wealth to focus on quality of life rather than consumption. And we need to ensure that future generations have the same rights as present generations to the natural and cultural benefits of the world. Importantly, we need to ensure that market prices of goods and services fully incorporate the environmental costs of their production and consumption. And we need to recognise the key role of youth culture and encourage an ethic of sustainability within youth culture. Then there's the principle of non-violence. And this is really an important one for global Greens, especially in the dangerous, risky international situation that we see in the world. The global Greens talk of peace and cooperation between individuals and between states. We have a principle that security should rest on cooperation between nations rather than be based on military strength. The global security system is capable of preventing, managing and resolving conflicts between nations, and that there should be a total disarmament of nuclear, biological and chemical weapons. Then there's the principle of respect for diversity. The global Greens talk of honouring cultural, linguistic, ethnic, sexual, religious and spiritual diversity within the context of individual responsibility towards all beings. They talk of promoting the building of a respectful, positive and responsible relationship across lines of division in the spirit of a multicultural society. Then this is less relevant in our country, but in many countries, recognising the rights of indigenous populations to the basic means of survival, including their economic and cultural rights, rights to land, and acknowledgement of their contribution to the common heritage of national and global culture. And then respecting the rights of ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, women and men, and young people. Then the principle of social justice. Social justice to global Greens means meeting the basic needs of all humans on Earth unconditionally, lifting the burden of debt on poor countries, eradicating poverty, eliminating illiteracy, and ensuring equal rights for all individuals all across the globe. And then finally, the principle of ecological wisdom. This sounds a bit ethereal when you first think about it, but then it just makes complete sense. It's about living within the ecological and resource limits of the planet, paying attention to biodiversity, paying attention to those natural laws, and valuing the wisdom of indigenous people of the world. Then the charter goes on. It's quite some pages long, but a great read. It goes on to describe many principles and policies that have been agreed between all of the Green parties in the world. And its most recent passing was at the 2017 Global Greens Conference that took place in Liverpool here in the UK. What I really love is the final policy that it has on the list there. Final page, it says, "We will support each other personally and politically with friendship, optimism and good humour, and not forget to enjoy ourselves in the process." And I think that's something that we always have to remember. No matter how bad things get, no matter how fractious things get, we have to support each other and we have to try and have fun while we do it. So that's the global Greens. And then I'll look now to the Green Party of England and Wales's philosophical basis. And really, they match up entirely with the global Greens principles, but they're articulated in some nice ways, and they really inform all of the political ideals, values and policies that we have here in the Green Party of England and Wales. So it starts with a quote that only after the last tree has been cut down, only after the last river has been poisoned, only after the last fish has been caught, only then will you find that money cannot be eaten. These are some excerpts now. We cannot go on indefinitely exploiting and wasting the natural resources of a finite world. If humans continue to promote policies which require unlimited consumption of raw materials, it will not lead to more riches, even for the few, but poverty for all. As human beings, we all have the potential to live cooperatively and harmoniously with each other, and with reverence and respect for the complex way of life of which we are a part. Yet it has become increasingly obvious that this potential cannot be realised while basic human needs remain largely unmet. The Green Party therefore places both personal and political change at the heart of its response to the ecological crisis, and is committed to creating a society in which individuals, through their ability to satisfy their basic needs more fully, are then able to better contribute to future sustainability. This principle is reflected in the radical green agenda, both for changes in values and lifestyles, and for reformed social, economic, and political structures. Society should guarantee access to basic material security for all, and should provide a wide range of opportunities for personal fulfillment in both a material and non-material sense. If hardship is even a possibility, a sense of insecurity will prevent individuals from acting in accordance with ecological constraints. A guarantee of security will not ensure voluntary ecological behaviour, but it's a necessary precondition. Now some of the more radical stuff, if that wasn't radical enough. The Green Party does not believe that there is an automatic moral obligation on all people to obey their governments. The Green Party seeks to maximise the extent to which obedience to laws is based on consent and minimise the need for conformity through deterrence. We believe there are occasions when individuals and groups in society may openly and peacefully protest at an unjust law or practice civil disobedience. We do not believe that there's only one way to change society or that we have all the answers. We seek to be part of a wider green movement that works for these principles through a variety of means. We generally support those who use reasonable and non-violent forms of direct action to further just aims. Our beliefs will bring us into conflict with those committed to material affluence, the accumulation of power, and the unsustainable exploitation of the earth. We are always ready to negotiate with those who oppose us and seek fair settlements that respect their needs for security, self-esteem, and freedom of choice. We will even work with those who disagree with us where sufficient common ground can be found to do so. However, we do not seek power at any price and will withdraw our support if we are asked to make irreversible or fundamental compromises. So I'm finished there reading verbatim excerpts from those two documents. But really, I felt it was important to speak out those to everybody here, because there's just such wisdom and depth in them that just can't be found in any other political movement, in my opinion. And it certainly goes much deeper than any policies, any immediate manifestos, any individuals. This is really a deep-seated movement, and this is what we're all about. So what it means to me. It's interesting to reflect on my membership of this local Green Party that we're in here now, our regional Green Party of Southwest England, our national party of the Green Party of England and Wales, the European Green Party, and then also our membership of the Global Green Party. And I think there's so much to despair about in the world, and I personally think that Greens are acutely aware of the hardship and struggle. And you know, we pay a lot of attention, and I think it can take a real toll on us to see what billions of humans face all around the world. But I find it so heartening and so, I think, therapeutic actually to be part of this political movement that seeks to give answers to these problems, to bring out the best in our human nature, and to alleviate the poverty and suffering while protecting our one planet Earth. I think some of the things that I've expressed here seem idealistic and even seem naive, but green politics is still in its infancy. You know, Simon's talked about it beginning in the 70s. It's got roots beyond that, but you know, this is a 50, 60-year-old political movement, still very much in our ascendancy. And I'm sure that every budding political movement at its time in history was seen as naive. I'm sure that the medieval peasants and burghers who wanted to challenge the rule of lords and kings were seen as naive. And the workers and trade unionists who wanted to elect working class representatives to Parliament under a Labour banner will have been seen as naive, just as the women and unlanded men who wanted the right to vote would have been seen as naive. Politics is a dance of competing ideas, and it's time for the Green Movement to take its leading role.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Pete. And I mean, one, thank you so much for sharing those documents, because I think that so many people don't actually understand like the depth of policy, the depth of debate and negotiation that goes on in the background to form these like global and or European and or national communities that come together as a political party. And it is truly mesmerizing when you get to dip into those worlds and see the debate live happening of these, you know, everyone highly intelligent, everyone with their own priorities, but at the same time come into a place where we can unite and agree on something that is a core value of the Green Party. I don't think anyone's ever mentioned anything as relevant in all of our cloud cafes as the moral obligation to agree with your government or not agree with your government, and the right to protest it in civil disobedience or non-violent forms, as we're currently experiencing today. I said I wasn't going to talk about the Queen, but we've seen people arrested today for protesting, which they have absolute right to, against the monarchy or against some of the things that have been happening recently. And I think that that is one of the wonderful things about the Green Party, is our support of non-violent direct action and our support of protest. And another thing that you mentioned around that we don't seek power at any price. I think that's one of also the beautiful things about Green Party politicians, is that we're elected by the people for the people, and that's who we're there for. It's people over power. And it's a wonderful thing. And thank you very much for taking us through that. I think we've had a little bit of chat in, I know we've got some like, so in the absolute, you know, trying to channel the Green Party values, have we got any, you know, strong female leaders in our presence that would like to give us 5 minutes of their thoughts? I'm looking at Molly and Catherine, and I mean, so many to choose from. Let me just get my list of participants up. If you fancy it, then please unmute yourself. Lynn, Carol, yeah, I'm going through the list now. These people have been elected and have served to the communities. Eva, is that Eva? Eva? Sorry, not everyone's got their full names on their thing. But please, if you've got anything to say, then please say it. In the meantime, I'm just going to say one quick thing about, oh, Jennifer, we've got a hand up. What would you like to say, Jennifer? Please turn your camera on if you can. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm surprised nobody else wanted to say anything, so I kind of put my hand up. I really like what both Simon and Pete said, and I don't think, Steve, we should ever apologise for and say that we think it's naive. It never ever is naive. What is naive is this belief that global capitalism can carry on. I joined the Green Party, as people know, about over 40 years ago. And my main reason was because it was completely logical, made sense, tied together with both human and ecological and everything else. It just made sense. And I don't think we should ever apologise for that or ever put ourselves down about it. We're the only ones talking sense. So to follow up on that, I wonder if either of you has got any, I mean, what we're asking is something utterly radical. We know that capitalism can't continue like this. So neither of you really mentioned, I mean, that's a reality that we have to face up to, I think. How do we do that? And how do we put that across politically?
Thanks, Jennifer, for that brilliant question and sharing a few of your thoughts with us. So how do we take down capitalism? Let's see who wants to go first.
I don't think there's a blueprint, but I do agree with your implicit assertion there that the Green Party is fundamentally an anti-capitalist political movement. you simply cannot read the philosophical basis. You cannot look at the Global Greens Charter and come to any other conclusion. I think that's, again, what Simon was saying about where do you define us on left and right. I mean, I think we certainly aren't a right-wing organisation, but to even start to try and define it on a spectrum like that, it's like, well, we're definitely anti-capitalist because we can't be anything else, because that continual exploitation of natural resources, that continual economic growth, that always finding a new frontier on which we can exploit is what capitalism depends on. It's what it's always depended on since before the Industrial Revolution. But the internal flywheel that keeps capitalism working, which is economic growth and is finding those new frontiers, that is going to come up against the barriers of ecological constraints. We probably already have come up against the barriers of it and gone through them. But yeah, capitalism can't survive. How quite we get from this point here now to that end, or not even an end point, but a sort of a midpoint, sort of a local end point, I don't know. And it's something that I constantly struggle with answering that, of how do we get from here to there? How do we get from our local successes? If I'm elected, and if a whole suite of, if we had a Green government elected at the next election, how do we as a Green government tackle that? How do we make the global change that needs to be made? I don't know. There is no blueprint. There can be no blueprint. But it's genuinely a question that has plagued me since I was about 18 years old, and I think ought to continue to plague all of us, because it's in that uncertainty and in that questioning that is where we individually each make that movement forward, I think. So that doesn't answer it at all, but it gives the best answer that I think I can give.
Thanks, Pete. The plague of capitalism. Okay, Simon, if you want to come in, and then I'll go to Molly.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I tend to try and avoid sort of thinking of naming things like that, and try and go down the route of, well, what is the outcome we want? Rather than saying we've got to stop this, and I don't disagree, we've got to stop capitalism, but actually thinking about, okay, where do we want to go and how do we get there, is potentially much more productive and much more and more important than sort of it's more challenging. I'll agree with you on that than saying we don't like this and having a demonstration against it. It's dead easy to demonstrate against something, but the thing I always think about is, okay, what is the solution? What is the way forward? And I think that goes back to that much more thinking of a sort of an outcome-driven and mission-driven thoughts.
Thanks, Simon. I think you're right on that. We're often seen as the party of no. So I think the party of how about we look at this vision of society instead might be a better way to approach things. Molly, you've remembered your name. Tell us what you think.
You've lured me in. Your question has lured me in, and I finished eating, so I'm totally in darkness. This is the state I'm in, so it shows, doesn't it? I don't agree with the party of no, incidentally. But what I was going to say is economists usually think of the economy as being based on three aspects: land, labour and capital. I agree with what Simon said, that I don't think it helps to come out and say we're an anti-capitalist party, but we've got three policies to address those three basic resources in the economy that, if they were put into place, would have dismantled capitalism sort of on the quiet. And that's why I think of them as the three jewels in the crown of our economic policy. And the first one is land value tax. So that basically reallocates land to people that are going to use it wisely and ends a sort of inequality that first created capitalism, which is inequality of land ownership. And the second one is universal basic income, which effectively ends wage slavery and so completely challenges the capitalist labour market. And the third one is monetary reform, which removes the ability to use wealth, use cash, use money as a way of extracting and storing and accumulating value, which is what I would say is the flywheel of capitalism. So I think we've got the answer. We should just be a lot more confident about our economic policy. I didn't write it, I inherited it, and I think it's really good. And those three things between them would dismantle the capitalist economy.
So there we go, Jenny. We've already got it. We just need more Greens in government and Greens in power so that we can implement them easily. So thank you, Molly, for
I think that's what I was saying, really. We have got the things, and I was really thinking more of the rampant global capitalism that we're up against at the moment, which is a really tough one, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think could possibly be a cloud cafe in itself. So if Elizabeth is on here, please write down how we break down global capitalism for a future session. But we've had a few more questions in, so I'm going to run through those. We've had one from Werner's iPad. If you'd like to ask the question yourself, Werner's iPad, then please do. If not, I'm more than happy to ask it on your behalf. But if you'd like to, then just unmute now and go ahead. If not, I will go ahead with it. Who wants to come in on that first, Pete or Simon?
Yeah, I'll say something. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Jane. I think the key often with businesses is that, and I completely agree with Molly's 3 points. I wish I'd remembered those, Molly. I was thinking, oh, what are they? Well done, it's good. But one of the things is that you have to remember, you have to distinguish between capitalist business that's driven for this complete growth, and also think about, is it a mission-driven company that's actually got a mission and wants to achieve something? And there is something in the background, and I think it's the B Corp organisation are working on this, and it's reform of the Companies Act. Because the Companies Act, I think it's paragraph 172, God, I'm a bit of a nerd, aren't I? Actually requires the chief exec to maximise profits for the shareholders, or words to that effect. But a slight amendment in the Companies Act to actually allow chief executives and board members to say, oh, our driving aim is not to maximise profits. Our driving aim is to deliver X, Y, and Z. Is a very interesting alternative. And this morning I was on a call with an organisation called Business Declares, which is over 100 businesses have declared a climate change emergency. Again, coming out of Stroud, this organisation, a majority or many of those are effectively mission-driven companies and don't have this desire to always maximise profits. So there is something there that can begin to tweak and change. But really good example you gave, Jane.
Do either of our presenters want to comment on that?
I'd give a slightly sideways view on that. Yes, it is an issue, and it was very much to do with lead in petrol and other pollutants and in lead piping. I mean, it's been a problem for a long while. But one of the intriguing things about lead poisoning in this country is that it's got its highest prevalence in the children of game keepers and people who work on shoots. And that is because lead is still used as the main form of shot for shooting pheasants and grouse, and because they're often shot in excess, it's then fed often to their children. And people thinking of eating game that's been shot with lead, there is, if you're eating it over a period of time, is actually quite a risk. And I believe one of the supermarkets this year has actually, purely on environmental health grounds, risk grounds of selling game that may poison their customers, has actually stopped taking grouse, which is quite intriguing.
There's a big problem with the way that contaminated land is managed in our country. The legal obligations fall, first of all, on the landowner to identify and then remediate land. And then if they fail to, then the local environmental health body can require the remediation of land. But then the funding of last resort then comes from the environmental health body. And I used to work for Doncaster Council about 10 years ago, and I was speaking to the environmental health people and asking them about this. And they said that basically all environmental health turn a blind eye to these things, because fundamentally, if they identify contaminated land, then they then have to pay to fix the contaminated land, and that's really expensive, and they don't have the resources to do it. So we don't have a competent or sensible way of requiring the remediation of land in this country. So that's definitely something that needs looking at. And there's also this kind of kicker clause in all of the legislation, where it's based around sort of what's reasonable to do, like reasonable expense to remediate the land. And basically, there's so much pollution all around. There's lead, there's all sorts of different things. Large parts of the country have got buried munitions. When I lived in Doncaster, there was the potential fracking site nearby where I lived was an ex-munitions factory. And in World War II, when they had extra explosives that they didn't need, that they needed to get rid of, they just dug a hole and buried it. And so there were random pockets of explosives buried all around this site, in a way that's really hard to actually find them all, because they are just higgledy-piggledy all over the place. And how do you fix that? And we were concerned that they were going to drill down into potentially a pocket of these explosives. That was why we were particularly concerned about it. But yeah, it's definitely something that needs fixing, and it's not just lead, but yeah, lead definitely is a particularly pernicious and toxic substance.
Thanks so much for coming back on that, Pete, and thanks so much, Jane, for your question.
So I recently joined the Green Party, having moved from Cheltenham, and I now live in King Stanley. My question was to Pete. So hello, Pete. I guess I've been an advocate for PR for all of my adult life, and I see it as a key enabler to reforming our broken democracy. I know, Pete, that you wrote recently to the Labour candidate for Stroud, trying to create a discussion around potential collaboration around the next election. And I wonder if you give some more insight into that letter and any discussions that you've had.
Great, yeah. So welcome to our Green Party and to Stroud and King Stanley. So you got Steve as your Green Party councillor. So
Indeed.
if you've not met Steve yet, then yeah, make sure you have a chat with him. So yes, our approach to Labour, we basically, I mean, the Green Party is always making approaches to Labour. We have done for years now. We've had that many general elections in the last 5 years that it's sort of easy to lose track of them. But we are fundamentally open to cooperation and collaboration with other parties. The issue is that we now have to stand firm and say that there needs to be some genuine reciprocation within any electoral arrangement that can be made, because the problem is that the Labour Party insists on standing Labour Party candidates in 100% of the constituencies across the United Kingdom. So that just fundamentally, before any even approach from us to Labour, just completely rules out any kind of reciprocal arrangement. So the only option within that would be for the Green Party to not stand candidates. And in that situation, what can we do? Do we just carry on standing aside forever? Yeah, it's difficult, but we have approached them. They rejected our approach on that basis of standing candidates in 100% of seats.
Yeah, I guess it was interesting that Andy Burnham recently wrote an article in The Guardian strongly advocating PR and trying to form, a consortium, I don't know what the right word is, a collaboration across like-minded people to try and get PR in place so that we never have to return to the undemocratic system that we've currently got.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there was to be an issue to coalesce the parties around, it should be proportional representation. And I think in that situation, with that would motivate everybody apart from the Conservatives to give some reciprocity, because this election would be the last one in which we had to fight in this first past the post system, and we could collaborate around that. Whether that can happen, I don't know. Labour Party policy nationally needs to change in order for them to even adopt proportional representation, and then secondarily to allow Labour candidates to stand aside and make arrangements. But it would completely transform our political system in this country. I think we would almost certainly never see a Conservative government, especially in this manifestation of the Conservatives, the kind of extreme right-wing Conservative Party that we've had over the last 10, 12 years that seems to just get worse and worse and worse. That couldn't exist because more than half of people don't want that to be in charge, and therefore they will never get the coalition that they would need to be able to gain a majority to form a government in the future. And I think things would broaden out. Some of the parties, especially the two main parties, I think would probably split into at least two each, but as they should. And we would all go and target our people, the people that think like us. So I'm here talking to what I think are people at least very favourable to the Greens, if not members. We should be able to have these conversations and take them out to the public. The other parties should have genuine conversations about what they really stand for, not just the attractive, shiny policies, not just saying, oh, we're going to knock some money off your energy bills and we're going to, give you cheaper petrol. Whatever it is that the parties have to promise at the moment to win those sort of, it's what, a few tens of thousands of voters that actually swing the elections one way or another between Labour or the Conservatives in those marginal constituencies. That's a mess. I'm preaching to the converted here. I think you probably wanted something more direct and concrete and local than this, but yeah, we need PR massively.
Absolutely. And just a final comment, I'm 62 years of age and I've only ever voted negative for the whole of my life. So yeah, to keep someone, try and keep someone out or kick someone out.
Well, you're lucky then, because in 2024 you'll be able to vote for Steve again and hopefully another candidate, and hopefully you'll get another one or two Green councillors. So yeah, it's nice to live in Stroud because we actually get to win an election for once. Yeah, I've been in the same position. Yeah, just always losing. So it's hopefully we won't be losers for too much longer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is your name really Werner? What was the name? Sorry.
It's Werner.
Thanks, Werner. Okay, thank you very much for your question. So, did you have something to say?
Austrian mum.
Austrian mum, fantastic. Simon, did you want to say anything on this question?
I was just going to demonstrate the innate debate, and that there is always room for disagreement in the Green Party. I slightly disagree with Pete's analysis of the last 12 years of Conservative government in calling it a right-wing government. I don't think it is entirely right-wing. My view of it, in sort of looking back at it, it's a socialist chumocracy, in the way that the tax breaks and the incentives have been rigged. It's more like a socialist party with bits of corporate capitalism on the edge. Because if it was a free market, the place would be completely different. I mean, just working in the area that I work in energy, if there was no tax breaks and things like that, we wouldn't have half the problems we have now. I mean, as we all probably know that, the British taxpayers between 2015 and 2019 actually paid more to the oil extraction companies than they gave back in taxes. We're actually paying people to extract oil and gas from the North Sea. And that is not capitalism. That is socialism gone wrong.
Always ready to be devil's advocate. Pete, have you got a retort for us?
I just say this illustrates perfectly where a two-dimensional left-right political compass doesn't work, does it? So it's sort of break it out into at least yeah, at least that kind of 2 axes, probably 3D. Yeah, sort of left, right, authoritarian, libertarian. And then there's probably another axis on there of, you know, how much do you want to destroy the planet or save the planet, let's say.
Thank you for the question, Verna, and thank you, Simon and Pete, for the responses. Carol's got her hand up. Carol, what would you like to tell us?
Right. I was just going to come in on that point of the left-right spectrum because it's one that interests me. My definition of socialism must be rather different to Simon's, because I look at it as being whether you're, if you like, whether you're working towards a more equal society or towards a more unequal society. And on that basis, I certainly don't regard myself as not on that spectrum. I count myself as a socialist because I believe in equality and I believe in social justice as well as ecological justice. So I don't think we should say we're entirely neutral from that point of view, because I don't think we are. I don't think that was what Pete was saying, but I think, if you like, we're starting from the left and we are developing it. And we are also looking at ecological justice, the other side of it, and bringing that in as well. But I think the reason that we talk and work with Labour and the Lib Dems more than we do with the Tories is that we actually do, from a social point of view, have more in common with them. I probably wouldn't include the existing National Labour Party in that, because I've got no idea what they stand for. They're just not saying. But so I wouldn't say we're off that. Well, we are off it, but we've gone off from a particular point, which is probably left of where any of the parties in Parliament are at the minute, is my view. Personal view. Yeah,
no, and I agree, but I also disagree insofar as it's trying to put a label on it. And you know, as I said, when you look at our policies, it's what would be the effect of our policies. And you know, Molly said that this would sort of basically delete capitalism, and I think that's the right way to look at it. It's looking at our policies, looking at, do we want this world as described? And then when you start trying to label it as, is it socialism, is it anti-capitalism, is it capitalism but with smaller entities, and rather than you end up just sort of getting into such a debate about how should we label what we can describe rather than just describing the thing. You know, it's you know, a rose by any different name is still as sweet. You know, we have a rose here, it doesn't matter what we call it. Apart from it's a sunflower because rose is Labour, but yeah.
Apart from it's a sunflower like that. Simon, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, my point that I was trying to say in my first speech was that it's to do with the objectives, not the names you put to it. And as I gave you my little example, is that yes, many of the outcomes of, as Pete just said, Green Party policy would be regarded, would align with perhaps a socialist view of what they want, but they are very much ideologically driven, in that there's a Labour way and a Conservative way. Whether they stick to it or not is another matter. And it's actually taking that left-right out of it. I mean, left-right all comes back from where the French sat in relation to whether they had a king or not, wasn't it? And it could have been completely the other way. It's a completely arbitrary nomenclature that we've come up with, and it's the outcomes and where you want to get to are really important. And I think left-right leads to unbelievably lazy journalism, and any opportunity to try and knock that back, I think, is really, really important to actually do that.
Thanks, guys, and thank you, Carol, for your comments. Okay, I'm going to Lynn with her hand up, and then I have just found Liz Child's question right at the beginning of the chat. Alan, thank you very much for pointing me to that. So Lynn, we'll go to you first, and then we'll go to Liz.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks for doing a great job tonight. One of the things I just wanted to make a plug for, and maybe Pete and Simon have a comment they can offer as well, is that if people are inspired by what they hear tonight, and I think it's been really inspiring to hear people talk about green values, and especially hear Pete and Simon give the information they gave. The elections for district and county council in Stroud are coming up in 2024 and 2025. And if you don't live in Stroud district or Gloucestershire, you should just check and see when the next elections are. But if people are really inspired, I would really encourage people to think about running for office. We need green ideas. We need greens at the table. We don't have any influence if we're not at the table. And it's really, really important for people to consider being a candidate. If you don't think you can be a candidate, to consider managing a campaign, getting involved, taking your street or an area and canvassing it and leafleting it. But anyway, I just wanted to make that plug because I think it's really easy for us to sit back and talk about green values, but we need to put them into place. And we're a political party, so we run for office, so we have people at the table. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
It's never off the clock. Thank you so much, Lynn, for reminding us what we're all here for.
They're really important points, Lynn. And what I'd say is that you don't need to learn the Global Greens Charter. You don't need to learn the Green Party's philosophical basis. You don't need to swallow all the policies and everything to be a local councillor. You just need to be, you just need to care about your community, really, and subscribe to sort of the general principles of the Green Party, and be able to work well with people and want to make a contribution to our local district and your local area. So don't let me put you off by being a massive nerd and spamming you with stuff in the chat of read this and read that. It just, do you care about your local area, and do you want to stand up and take a sort of leadership role in your community?
Absolutely, and we've got some of the best councillors possible on this call, so spam them with your questions and your comments, and they will help you if you've got any worries. Okay, so we're going to Liz Child, if you want to unmute yourself. Sorry for missing you at the beginning there, if you're still with us.
I am still with us. Can you see me?
Yes, I can, Liz. Fantastic. Sorry about that.
Okay. When I talk to folk, a lot of people say they don't know what the Green Party is about, and what they're talking about really is the economic policies. And while it's complex understanding them and putting them into a nice framework, my question is really that Molly proposed the term, I think it was around before, but bioregionalism as an economic model. And I was taken with that. And at the time of reading her book, the thing that I think that a lot of people need, who might or might not vote for the Greens, is something that is a term that tells a story of what you're changing to. Every politician talks about change, and relentlessly the word change comes up, but there's very little definition of those changes at election time. And I wonder whether, because Simon was saying how the district Green councillors work with all the other parties and even the Conservatives, he said, at times on particular things. And that is good, a great thing. But it seems to me that those workings tend to be not on international policy or particularly national policy, but they tend to be effective on more local policy. And that relates to the bioregionalism of sort of resources and exchange and trade. So I'm asking really, is it worthwhile us having a term that tells the story that the Green Party wants to tell in terms of an alternative to capitalism, really?
Thanks, Liz. Okay, Pete, you're unmuted already, so I'm picking on you.
Oh, I never muted myself. I'm thinking. I'm reflecting. If anyone wants to jump in and say something while I mull that, because yeah, I'm reflecting.
And also, Alan did ask if we've got a definition of bioregionalism, was it? So if Liz or did you say Molly proposed it so we can hold her accountable again? What is bioregionalism?
She might be better at giving a definition, given she wrote the book.
Oh, okay. Well, absolutely then. I don't know if she's still with us either. I think she's dropped off, so we'll have to read the book.
Well, the best I can do is she wrote the book called The Bioregional Economy, Land, Liberty and the Pursuit of Happiness. And it effectively talks about local regions which are related to the natural economies of that the land provides in lots of ways. So that this involves more localism, more local trade, less international trade, and keeping the economy local.
Thanks, Liz. I do remember it now because we had a whole cloud cafe on local food networks just around the beginning of COVID, and I think that we spoke about it then. But great definition, so thanks. Pete or Simon, any comments?
No, I think that's a fair definition. I've just put a link into the bioregional.com organization. I think it is basing the economy that works best at that level. But I do recall in Molly's book, it did have links to a level of international trade. I think we do have to recognise that, you know, this country that we live in on the western edge of Europe has been a seafaring trading nation for several thousand years. So we will, I think, always continue to trade. It's in the very nature of humans. And it's so I think fuel and fuel prices and emissions will change that to bringing things more locally, and in areas that I work in to do with agriculture. It's certainly an amazing driver at the moment with the spike in fuel prices. It's completely transforming the way landowners and farmers are thinking about the economy of their farm, and the cost of inputs, the cost of transport, and if you can get whatever inputs you need locally or not have any inputs, it's quite an important driver, and that goes back to the wider issue of it goes back to something I said about not necessarily the exhaustion of resources that was mentioned in the blueprint, but the spikes in prices, and that is related to a shortage because of a demand somewhere else, and that's driving people to think much more locally. So bioregional tends to be within reason stable, but you have to remember nothing's going to be perfect, and there's always going to be change in these things, and I think that's really important. Can I throw in a completely different angle on this, just really to try and stimulate
Simon.
Stimulate a bit of debate, really, because it's one of the things that I've often sort of grappled with, is that the fact that Greens are often seen as cooperative, and we are in a way, and also perhaps non-competitive. But I would strongly disagree with that, because if anybody's worked to try and get to be elected, they have to be uber competitive and uber driven. Probably the wrong word, uber, but incredibly well driven. And there is this interesting dichotomy between being very, very driven and goal orientated and wanting to win, which is not always linked to a sort of a green and sustainable way forward, and achieving sustainability. And it's this dichotomy, that how you capture that drive and desire to win without beating the hell out of your opponents and crushing them to the ground, and completely exploiting to them, which was traditionally the way humans did it when they settled differences by battles rather than, or they still do settle them by battle, but actually crushing your opposition rather than by democratic means, and how that balance is attained. Is that too deep? And did anybody understand what I was saying?
Well, Pete, you've got two massive questions to fit into about 3 minutes. So tell us your thoughts on local economy and supporting local environment, and tell us your thoughts on Simon's question around embracing the competitive side of ourselves.
Jenny, can I just chip in? Because
yes,
my question was largely about, do we need a term that explains our economic values?
okay, well, Pete can definitely give it a go at including that, and Simon, you've got 2 minutes while he does to think of a way of describing it as well. So thanks for bringing us back, Liz. So
the question of a term, again, it's looking at, do we need a label? How do we label what we are, what we're about?
Precisely.
And I think, yes, if it's something that is then understood more widely, but no, if it then kind of pigeonholes it and means that then to sort of understand what we're referring to by using that label is then sort of creates another distance between what we're actually trying to communicate. So it's probably, rather than a label, it's probably like what you might call an elevator pitch. You know, if you got in a lift with somebody, it's very American, call it an elevator, but it's a sort of American kind of marketing concept. But when you get in a lift with somebody, if you wanted to try and tell them what you want to tell them before you get the lift to whichever floor one of you is going to get off, you need to be able to summarize your ideas into that kind of 10 seconds short. It's not a soundbite as such. It's a how do you encapsulate that whole thing? I think it has to be more than a word, it has to be more than perhaps bioregionalism, but it has to be a heck of a lot less than a Global Greens Charter or a Green Party manifesto. We do need some way of branding ourselves in a way that resonates with people and they see that. And I know that the National Green Party is doing a lot of work on our branding, and that's not just how do we look, you know, is it a nice logo, is it this and that? It's really, are we able to meet people in their minds? Are the messages that we're putting out being received by people? Again, it's a big piece of work, and it's something that we always need to be mindful of, because we've not done it. Because if we did do it, then we'd have a heck of a lot more people voting Green, because they just think, yeah, we need this. So it is a failure in communication. It's a failure in my communication that I can't give you that elevator pitch. I need to work on that. Yeah, I'll try and take that away, because that would be handy.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for the question, Liz. Are we?
I'll just give you a one-word answer in terms of if people want labels on the type of economic policy that the Greens will pursue, it would be Donut Economics, Kate Raworth. And I think it would be basically that we'd want an economic system that provided for all without exceeding the planetary boundaries. And that's what green economics objective perhaps it should be. And I've given a link to Kate Raworth's website in the chat.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, donut economics is big on the European spectrum at the minute as well, and everybody is talking about it. So great that that's come up, and encourage everybody to have a read. Thank you both for participating and answering all these questions that have really spanned a whole range of topics tonight, which I think is, you know, one of the things that Greens need to do more often is showcase the breadth of policy that we've got and the ideas that we've got, and that they're well thought out, and that they're there to take everybody with us rather than just being a one issue party that we maybe were seen as in the past. So we've got 3 minutes left. I usually like to ask our presenters, have you got like a call to action, one final minute that you want to give to people that they leave tonight's session with? Something important or something that engages you that you can share with them as the final minute. Anyone want to go first? Sorry to put you on the spot.
So first of all, are we capturing everything that's happened in the chat alongside the video recording that's happened? Because there's some really good stuff that everyone's put in there, and there's, yeah, I thrown a few links, lots of other people are throwing in great stuff, so it'd be a shame to lose that along with the video recording. And then, yeah, the call to action. I mean, Lynn's already given a bit of a call to action in terms of getting involved, but the call to action that got me involved in the Green Party in the first place, I was already a member for a few years, but I saw Natalie Bennett speak at a festival in, must have been 2012, or maybe 2013, and Natalie Bennett gave this really good speech, and then I was really inspired and it was great, and then she finished it off saying, go back to wherever you live and get in touch with your local Green Party, find out what they're doing. If they've got candidates, get involved, help them get elected. If they've not got candidates, be the candidate. And that just completely sparked everything that I've done since. And yeah, just get involved, do whatever you can to help. There are loads of different roles that we need for people to get involved with. There's candidates, there's leafleters, there's campaign organisers, which is so important. We need people to help organise those ward level campaigns. And, you know, if you want to help out with my campaign as well and really get stuck in, then yeah, we need that, because it's one thing being the face of it, but there's a heck of a lot of organisation that goes in behind the scenes to actually winning. You can have the best candidate in the world and you will not win unless you've got really, really good organisers.
Thank you, Pete, for your call to action. And yes, all the links are also saved and people's comments and questions will take account of. Simon, did you have one last call to action or thing that you would like to say?
Yeah, I think the key is to don't just talk about it, get on and do it.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our first session back in the autumn season of the Cloud Cafe. As always, it's a pleasure to host these, but so much work goes into the organisation and management and delivery of these sessions. So if anybody feels like donating to the Stroud Green Party, please do. There'll be a donation link. Oh, there is already going into the chat. Also, please follow us on social media, like, comment, join the campaigns like people say. And we're asking, why is the Green Party part for the future? And for me, it's because if we don't have the Green Party, there is no future that is livable and enjoyable for everybody, which is exactly what we want, something that works for everyone. Thank you very much for joining us and taking the time out of your evenings. We appreciate all your questions and comments. See you in October.